Video games began in the United States in 1971 with the creation of the Odyssey by Magnavox, an interactive gaming device that can be hooked into an individual's own television. From there, the video game industry took flight in America, where arcade games were the favored medium. The early 1980s became known as the golden age of video games. Arcade games catered to an audience of all ages in America. Although dozens of new arcade games passed the tests for marketability at factories, many did not gain attention from the audience to make a profit. The factor that made an arcade game successful was if it captures the player's attention, but also gives the gamer a measure of control over the action. Shigeru Miyamoto, a junior game designer who became the general manager of Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development, mastered this balance between player control and grabbing player attention through his vast legacy of video games. He boosted Nintendo's status in 1980 from a humble Japan-based toy company to an international video game giant. This all began with Shigeru Miyamoto's innovation of a failed arcade game project that is now known as Donkey Kong. In 1980, Nintendo, a toy company at the time, released an arcade game called Radar Scope. Although it was a success in Japan, it did terribly in the United States. In order to set their financial losses back, Nintendo Shigeru Miyamoto and Gunpei Yokoi were set to the task of creating a new arcade game using the Radar Scope technology. In a 2000 interview for Nintendo Online magazine, Shigeru Miyamoto said this about the creation of Donkey Kong. Back then we were trying to make a game based on Popeye, so that being the case, it was decided that we were going to have a big hulking character Brutus and a small character Popeye. Eventually the plan changed, and it was decided that we would proceed with making the game without using the Popeye concept. And with that, as our small hero we cast Mario, and as our hulking villain we created Donkey Kong. That's the way the arcade Donkey Kong was made. During 1980 and 1981, arcade games gained a revenue jump from $2.8 billion to $5 billion in the United States. This proves that the United States was the perfect place to launch a prospecting arcade game due to its large market for them. The launching of Shigeru Miyamoto's arcade games in America helped Nintendo's popularity due to the American audience's want for a game that captures players' attention. Shigeru Miyamoto did this by introducing a story, a diversity in levels, and a platform gaming mechanic to American audiences. Donkey Kong, Miyamoto's creation from the Radar Scope technology, sold over 60,000 consoles in the United States alone. Some of the major effects on the history of video games caused by Shigeru Miyamoto releasing Donkey Kong were the creation of the platforming genre and the introduction of storytelling in video games. This genre dominated in video games during the 80s and 90s. Platforming is the game mechanic where a player controls a character to jump to multiple platforms to complete a level. Since the initial success of this mechanic, platforming soon grew to its own genre with games such as Super Mario Bros., another one of Miyamoto's creations, Mega Man, Prince of Persia, and many others. Storytelling in games was first introduced through Donkey Kong with its narrative of an ape capturing a girl and the hero having to rescue her. All video games prior merely had a simple goal and nameless characters used as mediums to reach those goals. This introduction of storytelling into a game changed games from being a two-dimensional medium with a repetitive task to complete, into a varying story which leaves the player asking what would happen next. Originally, video games were purely created by engineers. But with these innovations, writers, designers, and even music composers began collaborating in the video game industry to meet the heightened expectations of the public. Shigeru Miyamoto himself led his own team of writers, designers, and music composers to create one of his next classics, The Legend of Zelda.
Of Dragon Warrior and The Legend of Zelda in Japan, there emerged a new trend in which scenario writers took a leading role in game design.
An opposing point of view would say that the Taito Corporation's Space Invaders arcade game was the first to gain overseas popularity and therefore was the most influential. Although this is true, Space Invaders popularized the shooting genre of video games, while Donkey Kong popularized the platforming genre, as well as the storytelling aspect of the games. Space Invaders was created solely by engineers, while Donkey Kong was created by the collaboration between both designers and engineers. This collaboration began the trend for many different specialists to work together towards the shared goal of creating a quality game. Although Space Invaders was one of the first Japanese arcade games to become popular in America, it did not create such a revolutionizing impact on the creation of video games as Donkey Kong did. Shigeru Miyamoto led Nintendo into the international video game industry through his legacy of characters and stories within his video game creations. With Nintendo's success, other companies came to compete with Nintendo in the market. With more companies in the market, a competition to gain the audience's attention through making more innovative video games began. Throughout the years, video game companies try to outdo each other in releasing video games with more realistic graphics, interesting storylines, and innovative game mechanics. all essentially trying to mirror the margin of success Shigeru Miyamoto had with Donkey Kong when it was released in America through essentially the same tactics. The lasting historical consequences of video games becoming more and more realistic with their stories and graphics through the competition in the market originated by Shigeru Miyamoto's video game legacy is the blurring of the lines between the virtual and real world. An example of the blurring of lines is through the piece of technology called the Oculus Rift. These seemingly innocent goggles cause people to be cut off from the world. This piece of technology allows people to enter the games by showing the games to the player through the perspective of the game character. With the rise of realism in video games, a rise in the amount of violent crimes being related to video games is also emerging in the world today. Video games have shown to cause an increase in violent thoughts in people according to the American Psychological Association. Mass killers have shared connections through violent video games as means for their actions. Shigeru Miyamoto was a leader in the global popularization of video games and a leader in the innovations of video game design. His legacy is in the timeless characters and stories he created through video games. He revolutionized video game mechanics through the introduction of platform gaming and storytelling. It is also in the competition for player attention in the video game industry, which he held a large hand in through these mechanics. With each of his games released, a new standard for other companies was set. Each company with its goal to outdo each other in graphics and stories, thus creating a snowball effect of video games becoming more and more realistic. The realism has come to the point where people can be cut off from the world and be psychologically affected by these games. In the end, the matter of realism in video games, its effects on human behavior, and what people can do about it is the moral question of the 21st century. But then again, many say video games are barrels of fun,